questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. On the 1st of July, Energy Australia electricity prices for the average household in New South Wales will rise by nearly 20%, or about $320 per year. Energy Australia has explained, and I quote, "Doing nothing means higher prices and less reliable energy for all customers." Will the Prime Minister now commit to work with Labor in the national interest to end the policy paralysis which continues to mean higher electricity prices for all Australians?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm surprised that the Leader of the Opposition imagines that he and his party have a great deal to contribute to bringing electricity prices down. After all, they do, he says, the member for Isaacs. Well, when they were in government, they doubled. That was their contribution. So they've got a great track record. They've got a great track record. Perhaps they think that because they know how to double electricity prices, they've got an insight into how to bring them down. Well, Mr Speaker, the reality is that the challenges we face in terms of electricity prices are overwhelmingly the consequence of policy failures by the Labor Party. Policy failures by the Labor Party, allowing energy and climate policy to be determined by ideology and politics, not by engineering and economics. Setting renewables targets, massive targets, without any regard to the storage and the backup power that was so obviously necessary. No regard given to that at all. And therein lies the source, the foundation of South Australia's problems. But right now, Mr Speaker, the single biggest element in pressuring wholesale prices for electricity is the price of gas. Why have gas prices gone up so much? Well, it could have a bit to do with the Victorian Labor government banning exploration and development. Could have a bit to do with that, Mr Speaker. But what about the decision of the previous federal Labor government and Queensland Labor government to allow a massive level of investment in exporting gas as LNG from Curtis Island without having any regard to the consequences for domestic supply? No regard. And yet they were warned. They were warned in their own energy white paper. They were warned by AEMO. They knew it was a risk. They took it. And my government has had to take the strong and unprecedented step of putting restrictions on exports in order to protect tens of thousands of Australian jobs. Labor's track record on energy is consistent. The one thing you know about the Labor Party is energy and electricity will always be more expensive.
The member for Griffith, the member for Jellybrand, the member for Corangamite has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister update the House on the steps the government is taking to put downward pressure on electricity prices and improve the reliability of the energy network for households and businesses?
The Prime Minister has the call. Prime Minister has the call. The member for Griffith is now warned.
I thank the member for her question. And, Mr Speaker, the honourable member's electorate has a large number of manufacturing industries, including those at the most innovative edge, and they need reliable and affordable energy to thrive and prosper. It's critical for the jobs in the honourable member's electorate and all honourable members' electorates. It's critical for investment for the well-being of communities. Now, Mr Speaker, we know all honourable members should be well aware that we have seen increasing pressure on energy prices. It is putting real pressure on household budgets. It is putting real pressure on businesses as they're seeing the price of electricity and even more so the price of gas increasing at a rapid rate. These are very troubling developments, and we are taking action to deal with them. We are taking action by avoiding repeating the mistakes of the past. This is not an experiment or an issue to be solved by ideology or politics. The keys to answering this problem, to addressing this problem, is economics and engineering. Now, Mr. Speaker, I meant in my previous answer, I talked about what we are doing to ensure that there is adequate supply for the domestic market for gas. That is a vitally important source of energy for electricity, for thermal heat, as a feedstock in the petrochemical and other industries. This is a vital part of our economy, and prices have gone up dramatically because of a scarcity of supply driven by the consequence of foolish and ill-thought-out decisions by previous governments, both of them Labor as it happens, to allow exports from Curtis Island without any regard to ring-fencing or protecting gas supplies for the domestic market. Mr. Speaker, moreover, we are examining the way in which we can increase the efficiency of gas pipelines, another big part of the cost of gas. So we're working on that to reforms there. We have the ACCC ensuring that there will be real transparency in the gas market. If we see more transparency about prices, that will enable us better to monitor and manage that sector. But, Mr. Speaker, above all, we are committed to the single largest increase in renewable generation in our history, Snowy Hydro 2.0. 2,000 megawatts. Members opposite scoff. Well, Mr. Speaker, they might talk about a few batteries here and there. Let me tell you, Snowy Hydro 2.0 will be able to generate 2,000 megawatts
Prime Minister's time
for 7.5
concluded.
weeks.
Members on my left. The member for Jagga Jagga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. In just 12 days' time, on the 1st of July, Energy Australia electricity prices for the average household in New South Wales will go up by nearly 20%, or almost $320 a year. So why is the Prime Minister cutting the $365 energy supplement for pensioners, a cut that will make it even harder for pensioners to keep the heater on this winter? Why is the Prime Minister hurting pensioners while giving millionaires a tax cut?
The Minister for Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for her question, and as we have been through before in this place, the particular supplement, which is a savings measure of the government that the member for Jagga Jagga refers to, is also a savings measure that they have banked. Money that they've already spent, and yet they come up here in yet another fantastic example of doublethink and criticise the savings measure that they've banked, saved and spent. And let's just have a look through how this happened. In fact, the member for Jagga Jagga described the measure, pursuant to her question today, in a press release as an unfair cut that Labor would oppose. But how do you oppose a savings measure as unfair when at the 2016 election you accepted and agreed to the savings measure, banked the savings measure and spent the money? And again, we go back to Labor's fiscal plan. And again, we go to the fiscal plan at page 30, where there is an incredibly long list with great precision of every single measure that we had presented as a savings measure, which the members opposite said that they would reverse. They go measure after measure after measure, but one of the measures notably absent is the measures you're now asking a question on, which they agreed to, which they banked, which they spent. But then, as we've noted, Mr. Speaker, as we've noted, opposing and supporting the same measure is now pretty much standard practice.
The Minister will resume his seat. The member for Jagga Jagga will resume her seat. The Minister has the call.
As we've noted, opposing and supporting the very same measure is now pretty much standard practice from members opposite, and particularly for the member for Jagga Jagga. As we've noted before, the member for Jagga Jagga opposed changes to the pension asset test for months in the lead up to the March 2016 election, when she was also taking signatures on a petition opposing the measures that they were also supporting. And then weeks after they'd agreed to the pension asset changes, still collecting signatures. Labor supports the closing of the carbon tax compensation at the 2016 election, but now opposes the same policy today, supporting and opposing the same policy at the one time. How is that even possible as a matter of rational common sense? So what they do now is get up here, accuse us of making a savings measure which they also support and which they have also banked the measures on. It might also be noted, Mr Speaker, that this government has just allocated $260 million as a one-off payment to pensioners, to cope with. They get $260 million worth of compensation to cope with electricity prices. And do we support or oppose that? Or do we support and oppose it at the same time? Or do we oppose it and then support it and then oppose it again? But be under no mistake, Mr Speaker, the thing that they now complain about is the very thing that they've already banked, saved and spent.
Just before I call the member for Grey, I'm pleased to inform the House that we have on the floor of the House today the South African High Commissioner, Her Excellency Ms Beryl Sisulu. On behalf of the House, extend a very warm welcome to you. And I call the member for Grey.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer update the House on the government's efforts to drive down energy costs for hard-working Australians and their businesses? Well, you may laugh. How is the budget working to ensure Australia has made a competitive and transparent energy market and delivers reliable and affordable energy to consumers?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Grey for his question. The Turnbull government is doing and will do everything that is needed to put downward pressure on electricity prices in this country, Mr Speaker, because we know to grow our economy and to support more and better paid jobs, this country needs reliable and affordable energy. And, Mr Speaker, what we are doing is not limiting ourselves to any one area, to any one energy source, to any one solution, Mr Speaker. What we are doing, we are embracing an all-of-the-above approach. This side of the House will take whatever action is necessary, Mr Speaker, to put downward pressure on electricity prices. And we won't balk at doing it. We won't be held back by ideology. We won't be held back, Mr Speaker, by the arguments of those who would want to restrict Australia's energy sources to any one source of energy. And in doing so, Mr Speaker, we set that out in the budget. We said that we would do what it took to secure reliable baseload, reliable, affordable energy, reliable, dispatchable energy, bankable energy, Mr Speaker, that the Australian economy needs to grow more and better paid jobs. We are securing access to our gas resources for domestic use through the initiatives led by the Prime Minister. We are ensuring electricity customers get a fair go through the work we're doing through the ACCC and the inquiry into energy prices, Mr Speaker. We are improving our regulations through the Minister for Energy through the COAG process to make it more transparent and to make our energy markets more efficient. We're investing in new generation, transmission and storage capabilities, in particular through the initiative of Snowy 2.0. And we're investing in new low-emissions technologies, Mr Speaker, through the CEFC. That's how you put downward pressure on electricity prices, Mr Speaker. That's how you put the pressure down. But what it requires is moving away from the politics-as-usual approach, which is being driven by the Leader of the Opposition and the ideology-driven approach by the Labor Party, who refuse to meet in the middle in this parliament and give the investment certainty that is required to put downward pressure on electricity prices in this country. If you're going to go on, as the Leader of the Opposition does, as he smirks at the dispatch box while talking about bipartisanship, that sort of politics-as-usual process gives you business as usual, which means energy prices and electricity prices will go up through the sort of approach which is being championed by the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker. Australians want all of us to be on their side when it comes to putting downward pressure on electricity prices. That's what the Turnbull government is doing, Mr Speaker. Those opposite want to play politics and drive ideology. That is what is holding them back and the Australian community back from getting the certainty they need.
Has concluded. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. This document from the Prime Minister's own office confirms that his government is cutting $22 billion from schools.
Members on my right. Member for Gilmore. Member for Corangamite. The Leader of the Opposition will begin his question. Again, the Leader of the House will cease interjecting.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This document from the Prime Minister's own office confirms that the government is cutting $22 billion from schools. How is it fair that this government is cutting $22 billion from schools but is giving millionaires a tax cut in just 12 days' time?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. There was a time, perhaps a happy time, when the Leader of the Opposition used to support needs-based funding. And he went around the countryside again and again. It was a glorious era, a golden age perhaps. He was supporting needs-based funding. In fact, it was going on until very recently, actually. He used to speak about David Gonski as though he was a secular saint. He held up and he said with heartfelt passion, Mr Speaker, he said, "I give a Gonski with all the empathy of such a compassionate man, only caring for the school children of Australia." But then he was exposed. Then all his, then I ruined it, says the member for Sydney. Oh dear, yes. Yes, it did rather ruin it for you when David Gonski called you out, when David Gonski exposed the hypocrisy and the inconsistency of the Labor Party's nonsense and all of the rubbish that they perpetrated for years, and hypocrisy, inconsistency. The member for Sydney and the Leader of the Opposition, under their secret deals, they believe that a school with exactly the same needs in one state should get less money than a school in another state, and from one system to another. No consistency, no transparency, and certainly not needs-based. The only needs it was based on were the political needs of the Labor Party. But Mr Speaker, let us hear from Ken Boston, one of the architects of the Gonski Plan, one of the most distinguished educationalists in Australia. Mr. Speaker, this is like a sort of the court of a Renaissance Pope. There are excommunications going left, right and centre. David Gonski thrown to the walls. Ken Boston, out he goes. Who will be purged next? Actually, I correct. It's more like the Politburo. More like the Politburo.
Members on my left.
All of the heroes of yesterday are being excommunicated by the Labor Party today. Well, Mr Speaker, at the risk of quoting a heretic, let me quote what Ken Boston said. 5 years after the release and subsequent emasculation of the Gonski report, that was by Labor, Australia has a rare second chance. The progressive elements in Australian education need to recognise their argument has been won. It will be a tragedy if the school funding bill is voted down in the Senate. Ken Boston, author of Gonski.
It's the independence question. The Leader of the Opposition seeking...
Hold your horses. I seek leave to table the government's private media briefing which confirms the $22 billion cut.
Leave's not granted. Just before I call the member for Henderson, I'd like to also welcome to question time today in the gallery Mr Mike Simon, the former member for Deakin, on behalf of the House, I again extend a very warm welcome to you. And also the two members from the Queensland Parliament who have just joined us, Mr Tim Nicholls, member for Clayford and Leader of the Opposition, and the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Ms Deb Frecklington, member for Nanango. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you. The member for Denison has the call.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, on your visit in November last year, it was reported on the front page of the Mercury that you were, quote, very open, in fact enthusiastic, unquote, about a city deal for Hobart. Indeed, you extolled the virtues of the $400 million STEM Centre and a light rail, and said a city deal would coordinate investment for the city. But here we are 8 months later, and the Lord Mayor tells me she's heard nothing since. Prime Minister, what have you done to make progress on a Hobart City deal? Have you held discussions with the Tasmanian State Government? And when can we expect something to happen?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Yes, thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. As the honourable member knows, my government is delivering for Tasmania. And in terms of city deals, 2 months ago we signed a historic city deal agreement for Launceston that was signed with the Premier and the Mayor of Launceston, demonstrating what can be done when all three levels of government come together. And the centrepiece is $260 million investment to move the University of Tasmania's main Launceston campus into the city centre. And it's about much more than simply building a campus. It coincides with the city's heart of the city redevelopment. It's about putting a new centre, new vibrancy into the centre of Launceston, and will position it as one of Australia's most livable and innovative regional cities. Now, Mr Speaker, it will boost the local economy by $360 million a year, creating over 2,700 new jobs. So I can understand why the honourable member who hails from Hobart is keen to have a city deal in Hobart. I can understand that. And I have discussed it with the Premier, and I can assure the honourable member that we would look forward to a city deal for Hobart. But we obviously need to work with the state and local governments, but we've demonstrated right around the country an enthusiasm for city deals. Of course, you have the Western Sydney City deal, the Townsville City deal, and there will be many others as we roll them out. Any plan would seek to maximise the opportunities for investment, jobs and growth from our significant infrastructure commitments.
Will resume his seat. The member for Denison on a point of order.
Speaker, on relevance, the question also goes to a timeline. When can we expect something to happen?
The member for Denison will resume his seat. When the question has a number of components, the questioner can't demand how the answer is given. The Prime Minister is being relevant to the question and has the call.
The budget, I'd remind the honourable member, the budget's already locked in $1.1 billion in projects for Tasmania, and in the honourable member's own electorate, we are providing $38 million towards the Hobart Airport runway extension. In fact, I was there only a little while ago. That project has reached a very important milestone, allowing for the work to start on the final stage. Works will also shortly start to upgrade the Hobart Airport roundabout, for which we provided $24 million. Now, Mr Speaker, I look forward to further discussions with the Premier about a city deal for Hobart. We are certainly very open to it, but plainly we need to get the enthusiasm and commitment and engagement from the state government and the city government and other interested parties, and I'm sure the honourable member will lend his considerable powers of advocacy to supporting a city deal for Hobart.
The member for FLYNN.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Environment and Energy. Will the minister update the House on how the government is taking a technology-neutral, all-of-the-above approach to energy policy? Is the minister aware of alternative approaches that could increase cost and threaten supply?
The Minister for Energy and the Environment.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for FLYNN for his question and acknowledge his deep commitment to the measures the Turnbull government is taking to increase gas supply through the export gas restrictions, through the increased investment in storage, like Snowy Hydro 2.0, through the work we're doing to rein in network costs as well as retail costs, and through the amendments that we are moving to the Clean Energy Finance Corporation to get carbon capture and storage into the mix. Now, we know that the Labor Party has an alternative approach where they saw electricity bills increase by 100% when they were in power, 100%. And we also know that they pursue a 45% emissions target. So I ask myself, why is Labor pursuing these reckless emissions reduction targets? And why is Labor pursuing these reckless emission reduction targets? And we know it's personal, and so the overworked, underpaid member for FLYNN told us today, in a way that really would appeal to those Australian families struggling with their electricity bills, those Australian businesses that may be closing their doors, those Australian pensioners who can't keep the lights on and their heating. So what did the member for FLYNN say today to ABC News? The member for FLYNN said, if we can't tackle climate change, we may lose the ski season, Mr Speaker. The member for FLYNN said if we can't tackle climate change, we might lose the ski season. What else has the member for FLYNN worked out? Is he worried about Christmas in July being a permanent fiction, Mr Speaker? Is the member for FLYNN worried about the Boxing Day test being on the 1st of August, Mr Speaker? No, but there is some good news. There is some good news about this climate change. The member for Lily's permanent tanning centre can be turned off now in August, Mr Speaker. It can be turned off now in August. Now, my department's done a bit of modelling. We've done a bit of modelling, Mr Speaker, and if the member for Lily turns off his tanning apparatus, we will save something like 500 megawatts, Mr Speaker. Half the capacity of the closure of Hazelwood, Mr Speaker. So at the end of the day, the Labor Party, you used to worry about people losing their jobs. You used to worry about families not being able to pay their electricity bills. You used to be worried about trade-exposed industries. Now, the member for FLYNN and the Labor Party are only worried about one thing: losing the ski season, Mr Speaker.
The member for Sydney has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is it fair that under this Prime Minister, funding for students with disabilities in Tasmania will be cut by 1/3, or $12 million, in 2018?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for a question, and I reject the assertion that she makes in it. The reality is, as she knows, that there is $18.6 billion of additional funding going into schools. It is rigorously needs-based, and one of the elements of special needs is, in fact, disabilities, as she knows, and so students with disabilities will get more funding over the course of that period. So that is a very clear, transparent, needs-based process. Now, the honourable member for Sydney, Mr Speaker, has set out consistently to mislead and frighten parents with her remarks about this, and I want to draw the honourable member's attention to this. Mr Speaker, she says in one of her statements called "The Facts on School Funding," as an outrage, Malcolm Turnbull wants to give private schools 80% of their fair level of funding and public schools just 20%. That's totally misleading. Well, the federal government has been the major funder of non-government schools for a very long time, and a smaller but rapidly increasing funder of public schools.
The member for Sydney will resume her seat. Member for Sydney will resume her seat. The Prime Minister has the call. There's no point of order.
That's the Speaker. And then she goes on to say—
The Prime Minister will resume his seat for a second. The member for Sydney will not debate with me by way of interjection, or she will not be in the chamber. She is warned. The Prime Minister has the call.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr Speaker. And she says, under Malcolm Turnbull's policy, more than half of funding goes to private schools. That's despite the fact private schools only account for around 30% of the nation's schools. Well, it has, yes, they say. Is that an outrage? What about state governments? This has been the fact that the Commonwealth is the major government funder of non-government, non-state and territory schools has been the case for many decades under Labor and Liberal governments. So this is just an example of the pathetic, misleading diatribes that we get from the member for Sydney. Mr Speaker, we have got an opportunity now to bring the school funding wars to an end.
Warned.
This is not about politicians. This is not about education unions. This is not about education bureaucrats. This is about our children. It's about their future. It's ensuring that they get the needs-based funding they deserve, whatever school they're in, whatever state they're in, whatever system they're in. And when they have special needs, they get the funding they need. And we then do the work to ensure that with Gonski 2.0, they get the quality education they need so that they can be top of the class right around the world.
The Prime Minister resume his seat. The right on cue, the member for Lawler, who's been warned, can leave under 94A. The member for Murray can resume his seat for a second. The member for Sydney seeking to table the document.
I am seeking to table the document that clearly shows the cuts to students with a disability.
Is leave granted? Leave is not
if you
granted.
Don't believe it,
the
look
member
at
for
it.
Murray has the call. Member for Murray has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Agriculture and Water Resources. Will the Deputy Prime Minister outline to the House what action the government has taken over the last 12 months to grow the agricultural sector, and what are the biggest threats to the agricultural productivity going forward?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question, and he knows more than most about what's happening in the agricultural sector and how it's growing. We're now currently negotiating greater access for peaches, plums and apricots into China. That will go on the back of the nectarines, which we've got access to, the access we've previously done with grapes, and how we're actually turning around the agricultural industry and have been since we've been in government. It should be noted that the national gross value of ag production when we came to government was $48.6 billion. It's now in excess of $63 billion, a 31% increase. It's a remarkable turnaround, the biggest turnaround that we've had in this nation, and it comes from good luck and also good governance. Good governance is so important that we stand behind things such as the free trade agreements which drive products in, but it's not just those, it's also getting things up such as the sugar code. And I note the member for Dawson and the member for Capricornia and the member for FLYNN and how important that sugar code was as we went into bat for the sugar producers up there and made sure that we delivered for them. Or for the Australian people in general, when we got the country of origin labelling through. The country of origin labelling that clearly shows that whether something is made in Australia with Australian workers, with Australian farmers, backed by the Australian economy, Australian health and workplace health and safety requirements, or made overseas. Nothing wrong with things coming overseas, we just need to know. And also the proportion of what is in the package and how much comes from our nation. These are all incredibly important, and we know that there are also a number of threats, and probably one of the greatest threats is the price of power. The price of power, it's so vitally important for irrigators, vitally important for abattoirs, vitally important for so many, and we're working so hard to make sure that we get a better outcome, but we don't get much support from the Labor Party. I'd like to acknowledge the leader of the opposition from Queensland and the deputy leader of the opposition and what they're doing. They're brave enough to build the coal-fired power station. They're brave enough to build the coal-fired power station. They have the capacity to do it. See, over here, they don't believe they want to shut them all down. They want to shut them all down. And in fact, the member for Port Adelaide wants to shut all the coal-fired power stations down. They were actually celebrating when they shut down Hazelwood, said it wouldn't cause a problem. The Labor Party, what we saw after they shut down Hazelwood, price of power, where did it go? Up. And that's what you get. If you had the nation run by them, you would have South Australia across the nation. Just complete chaos. Complete chaos. So we are not scared of having coal-fired power. We are not scared of making sure that we have affordable power so that working men and women have manufacturing jobs. We believe in them having manufacturing jobs. We believe in the coal miners. We believe in the steel workers at Whyalla. We still stand up for them. But the Labor Party has given up on them. The Labor Party no longer believes in labourers, and the head of the Labor Party in opposition is the former head of the AWU.
The Deputy Prime Minister's time has concluded. The member for Moreton is warned. The member for Sydney has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The National Catholic Education Commission tweeted today, and I quote, "School choice is under significant threat because of the minister's funding model, would raise questions about affordability of Catholic schools. Long-term Liberals like the member for Menzies used to support school choice. So when will this Liberal government under this Prime Minister admit that his cuts to Catholic schools threaten choice for parents?"
The Minister for the Environment and Energy, representing the Minister for Education.
Well, the member...
Members on my left. Come on.
Well, the members opposite might like to know that under the Turnbull government's record spending on education, Catholic schools will be $1.2 billion better off over the next 4 years, $3.4 billion better off over the next 10 years. The Brisbane Catholic Education Office has welcomed the package. Students in the Catholic sector will receive the highest amount of Commonwealth funding on a per-student basis now and under our package. Mr Speaker, when the Leader of the Opposition went to a number of Catholic schools, including to the Holy Family School in Mount Waverley, did he know that they would get an extra $4.3 million over 10 years, Mr Speaker? When the Leader of the Opposition went to Our Lady of Help in East Brunswick, did the Leader of the Opposition know that that school would be $3.5 million better off over 10 years, Mr Speaker? Now, the system under the Turnbull government will receive $18.6 billion extra over the next 10 years, a 75% increase. More than 9,000 schools will be better off. All sectors will be better off, the independent school sector, the government school sector and the Catholic school sector, all of which are being denied by those opposite.
The member for Boothby.
Will the minister explain the benefits to the nation of the National Naval Shipbuilding Project and any threats that put that project at risk? How will the federal government ensure power supply is guaranteed to the Osborne facility?
The Minister for Defence Industry.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Boothby for her question. And she, like me and the rest of the government, knows that it's critical that ideology never trump the practical when it comes to energy supply in Australia. And that is why, Mr Speaker, this government is ensuring that we have affordable energy, stable energy and a responsible approach to lowering our emissions, rather than the ideological approach that's been adopted by the Labor Party, particularly in South Australia. And the reason why, of course, South Australia is facing the energy crisis that it does now is because of the ideological approach of the South Australian Labor government, which has led us to the highest prices for our energy in Australia and the least reliable supply of energy to our businesses. Mr Speaker, there was no reason for Northern Power at Port Augusta to close. Northern Power was operating perfectly profitably, Mr Speaker, supplying baseload power to the South Australian energy grid, supporting our economy. It was South Australian Labor's policies that forced it to close, Mr Speaker, and they were glad when it did. And just don't take my word for it. The CEO of Alinta Energy, the owner of Northern Power, himself said, despite talks with the SA government to stay open, its policies to promote high levels of renewable energy generation has forced the power station's closure. So, Mr Speaker, Labor's ideological approach to energy supply has snatched the livelihoods of 253 Australians who worked at Lee Creek at the brown coal power supply there, 225 at Northern Power. So almost 500 people lost their jobs because of an ideological approach to power by the Labor Party in South Australia, replicated here in Canberra. And what that means to Lee Creek, essentially, Mr Speaker, is the town has no economy. And that means people have left the town in droves. But what this government is doing, on the other hand, is taking a pragmatic, all-of-the-above approach to energy supply in Australia. We know that we need to look at all technologies that are working, that might work in the future. We need to be technology neutral, and it comes home very much to the naval shipbuilding project that the member of Boothby raised, Mr Speaker, because we are faced with the prospect of using $20 million of Australian taxpayers' money to secure the energy supply at Osborne for our shipbuilding and our submarine yard development. We're putting $1.3 billion into infrastructure in South Australia alone, on submarine yards, the shipyard, securing the precinct, buying the common user facility from the state government. But we have to put $20 million of taxpayers' money to generate power because of the failure of the South Australian Labor government, which this party here in Canberra wants to replicate.
The member for Scullin.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Catholic Education Commission in Victoria has said of the government's cuts to schools, and I quote, "For Victoria's Catholic schools, that funding cut will add up to over $25 million per year." So why did every member of this government— The member for Scullin will resume his seat. The members for Barker and others will cease interjecting. I can't hear the question. The member for Scullin will begin again. Yes, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Catholic Education Commission of Victoria has said about the government's cuts to schools, and I quote, "For Victoria's Catholic schools, that funding cut would add up to over $25 million per year." So why did every member of this government, including the member for Menzies, vote in this very House for $22 billion of cuts to schools? Will the Prime Minister now admit to the Australian people and every member of this House that he's cutting funds to Catholic schools?
The member's time has concluded. The Leader of the House and the member for Grayndler will cease interjecting. The Minister for the Environment and Energy, representing the Minister for Education.
Well, the member for Scullin may be interested to know that under the Turnbull government's plan, there are 46 schools in his electorate.
Members on my left. Okay, members on my left, the Manager of Opposition Business, the Leader of the Opposition, members on their left have made their point. The Minister will just resume his seat for a second. The Minister has the call.
The House may be interested to know that in the electorate of Scullin there are 46 schools who will miss out on an average of $7.6 million if the Turnbull government's schools package is blocked. So I say to the member for Scullin, he should be aware that the Catholic school system not only will be getting $3.4 billion of additional money over the next decade, he should also be aware that the Catholic school system will still be able to allocate the money as the way they see fit, and that in his state and my state of Victoria, the Catholic school system per student will see an increase of 3.3% under the Turnbull government's plan. In the state of New South Wales, the Catholic system on a per-student basis will see an increase of 3.6%. In Queensland, that increase will be 3.5%. In South Australia, it will be 3.7%. In Western Australia, it will be 3.8%. In Tasmania, it will be 4.3%. So, Mr Speaker, the Catholic school system, like the independent school system, like the government school system, will be much better off under the Turnbull government's school program and much worse off under Labor's 27 special deals.
The member for O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment. Will the Minister outline to the House the importance of affordable and reliable energy for Australian exporters, particularly small businesses? Is the minister aware of any alternative approaches to energy that would threaten Australian jobs?
The Minister for Trade and Investment has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for O'Connor for his question, because the Coalition, of course, has a very strong track record when it comes to delivering a trifecta of North Asia powerhouse agreements, which are giving Aussie exporters, many of them small and medium-sized businesses, globally preferential market access, which is helping to drive economic growth and helping to ensure that we're also driving jobs. Indeed, in the member for O'Connor's own electorate, we've seen businesses like the Avocado Export Company, Esper and Sabaloni, and Chatsfield Wines, who are now taking advantage of this unmatched preferential access to some of the world's largest consumer markets to be able to grow their businesses, to drive investment into their businesses, and as a consequence be able to improve job opportunities for Australians in the member for O'Connor's electorate, and not just his, but many exporting electorates across this great country. And that's a consequence of the agreements that the Coalition's been able to put in place. But a crucial ingredient to being able to ensure that we maximise the opportunity in terms of these export markets is affordable and reliable energy, because we've got to know that our exporters have access to affordable and stable energy supply in order to make the most of these opportunities. Now, many of these businesses, as I mentioned, are taking advantage of these free trade agreements, and they're small and medium-sized businesses. Indeed, in their submission to the Finkel report, the Chamber of Commerce and Industry in South Australia noted how electricity cost increases erode Australia's business market competitiveness. Now, that's a principle that we understand, right? This side of the House fundamentally understands that you must have stability and certainty of supply, and without it, as the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which represents many small and medium businesses, without it, their business competitiveness goes backwards. And that's why this side of the House is focused on the Australian Domestic Gas Security Mechanism to ensure that there is security of gas supply to meet the needs of Australian consumers first. This side of the House will make sure that we remain committed to stable and affordable energy. But it's very different to that side of the House. And I heard about alternative policies. Well, there are, because we see the ideology that's driven by the Leader of the Opposition, an approach that sees him more concerned about addressing the concerns of the Labor left than he is about what's best for Australian consumers, more concerned with the politics of energy policy than he is about what are good energy prices, more concerned about holding in abeyance the member for Grainler than he is about what's good for Australian small and medium-sized businesses. The simple fact is, Mr Speaker, that when it comes to Red Bill, this guy doesn't have wings. This guy's more about fizz and a lack of substance than is about better, more affordable and more secure energy supply for Australian small and medium businesses.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. Media reports state that the Parliamentary Budget Office has confirmed that the government's cutting $3.1 billion from Catholic schools. But Department of Education data shows the government's cutting $4.6 billion from Catholic schools. Prime Minister, which figure is correct? And does the Prime Minister seriously expect parents with children at Catholic schools to believe that fees won't go up?
The Leader of the House will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
Member for his question. I refer him to the answers given by myself and the Minister representing the Minister for Education. And I just recap. The funding program in our education package that is before the Senate at the moment involves an extra $18.6 billion investment in schools over the next decade. Funding for students in our schools will increase by an average of 4.1% every single year from 2018 to 2027. It'll be 3.5% increase for students in Catholic schools overall, 4.1% for students in independent schools. The scheme is fair, it is transparent, it is needs-based. Honourable members opposite know that, as Ken Boston said, and I hope it doesn't produce too emetic a reaction on the part of those disappointed in Mr Boston's apostasy, but Mr Boston, Dr Boston, told the truth. He said the Labor Party was a corruption of the Gonski model. He knows that Labor failed to deliver on that promise. They did not focus on the needs of the students as we have. They focused on the needs of their own political objectives. 27 secret deals. We are delivering more funding fairly, transparently, needs-based across the nation. Every system, state, territory, Catholic, independent, is getting more funding per student across the board based on need. That's what Labor used to be committed to, but they're not any longer. Their hypocrisy and their political gamesmanship is leaving the children of Australia behind. As I said in my earlier answer, Mr Speaker, the funding wars should end. It's about time the Labor Party focused on the kids, focused on their needs, getting the funding right for them, and then ensuring they get the first-class education they deserve. That's our commitment. Labor's politics approach on this has failed Australian children, let them down, an exercise in hypocrisy and abandonment of future generations' right to get a first-class education.
The member for Capricornia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Small Business. Will the minister update the House on action the government is taking to protect small businesses from the impact of unreliable energy supply? What hurdles stand in the way to achieving energy security for hard-working Australian small businesses?
The Minister for Small Business.
Good minister.
The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Capricornia for her question. It's a good one. The member for Capricornia is a passionate advocate for the almost 13,500 small and medium businesses in her electorate, and like all of us on this side of the House, the member knows how vital, reliable and affordable power is for small businesses to grow and to create jobs. I was in Yeppoon in the member's electorate just the other day, and we met many small businesses doing what small businesses do best. That's growing their enterprise, that's creating jobs. Across the members' electorate, each and every small business is doing the same, taking a risk and having a go each and every day. But they simply cannot keep up with high energy prices and unreliable sources. In Rockhampton, Dobinson Spring and Suspension's power costs have tripled in a decade. Tripled. Solar installation has helped, but it's no use for early morning furnace operations. They cannot afford the cost of solar storage, which would be about $2 million, and they're considering diesel. In the Pioneer Valley in the members' electorate, a sugarcane grower says the electricity required to pump water was costing $9 a tonne, and they too are considering diesel, Mr Speaker. These are stories echoed in small businesses throughout central Queensland and across the country. They are the small businesses who know an ideological approach to energy simply does not work. And I hear from small businesses everywhere, such as a financial planner at Gem Capital in Adelaide, in the member for Boothby's electorate, who told me about his backup diesel generator due to inconsistent supply. You can't grow your business if the power doesn't switch on. You can't create a job if you can't afford the energy. And you can't invest in your future if you don't know what the next quarter's power bill is going to look like. So this government, Mr Speaker, we're taking action. We're taking action. Our priority are these small businesses and the people who pay the bill at home. We are focused on energy reliability and energy affordability. We know that blackouts in Australia were not a hiccup, as the member for Port Adelaide called them. They were a wake-up call. We've directed the ACCC to review retail electricity prices to ensure consumers benefit from competition in the national electricity market. We are securing domestic supply of gas and ensuring the domestic market has the gas it needs to help keep prices down. And we are Turnbull charging, oh sorry, that should be turbocharging Snowy Hydro, just near my Riverina electorate, to increase its capacity, to create jobs and to bring confidence and affordability to a sector which is desperately in need. Economics and engineering. As the turbocharger himself, the Prime Minister, said just a few moments ago. And while we work responsibly to secure Australian supply and get prices as low as possible, those opposite, well, they just stay stuck to a reckless and an ideological approach. A renewable energy target of 50% by 2030 will increase prices and instability in the market, yet those opposite, they just cheer at home. They just cheer at home. The forced closure of coal-fired power plants creates even more instability and leaves Australians without a job.
The minister's time has
they just cheer
concluded.
at home.
The member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, that's you.
Mr Prime Minister, it's reported that 151 public schools in the Northern Territory will have their funding cut because of claims by your government that they are overfunded. Prime Minister, is that correct? And will the Prime Minister release the full list of schools, including public schools, that the government claims are overfunded, instead of selectively briefing out the names of just a select few?
The Minister for Energy and the Environment, representing the Minister for Education.
Well, Mr Speaker, I can confirm to the House that under the Turnbull government's package of additional school funding for the Northern Territory, the independent school sector will be 5.1% better off over 10 years, the Catholic school sector 5.6% better off, and the government school sector 1.3% better off. Now, Mr Speaker, in the seat of Lingiari, there are 137 schools who will miss out on an average of $3.2 million each if the Labor Party has their way. So the member for Lingiari should be ashamed of himself. He should be ashamed of himself coming into this place and pretending that he's arguing for more funding when, as a result of his actions and his party's actions, he is denying 137 schools, on average, $3.2 million in additional funding. Now, Mr Speaker, the Labor Party had 27 secret deals, 27 secret and special deals. They've never funded their promises. They've only delivered budget deficits. We on this side of the House have created a transparent and fair education funding system, Mr Speaker. It's been endorsed by everyone from the Grattan Institute to the Mitchell Institute to many in the sector, from the Schools Association, the Parents Association, the Primary Schools Association and the like. And, Mr Speaker, I do want to point out to the Leader of the Opposition his behaviour in this matter, leading the charge against the Turnbull government's extra $18.6 billion of funding, means that in his own electorate, 54 schools in the seat of Maribyrnong, 54 schools in the seat of Maribyrnong will miss out on an average of $7.2 million each, Mr Speaker.
Shame. The member for PETRIE has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. Will the Minister please update the House on steps the government is taking to strengthen the requirements for obtaining Australian citizenship? What are the benefits of having a strong and consistent approach to national security?
The Minister for Immigration and Border Protection.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I want to thank the member for PETRIE very much for his question. He, like all of us on this side of the parliament, want to make sure that we have secure borders in this country because, as all Australians know, Mr Speaker, if you can't secure your borders, you cannot provide national security, particularly in the current age. Now, we have made some changes, Mr Speaker. We made an announcement only a month ago in relation to strengthening the arrangements with regard to Australian citizenship. There are some 5 million people who have become Australian citizens since 1949, and we are a great country today because of that. But we want to make sure, Mr Speaker, that people who are becoming Australian citizens are people who deserve to become Australian citizens. So, as we're seeing around the world at the moment, it is important for sovereign nations to get it right when it comes to Australian citizenship. Now, is it any wonder, Mr Speaker, that under this Leader of the Opposition, it is you again. Yes, it is. It is you again. Mr Speaker, this Leader of the Opposition has no ability to pull those behind him into line when it comes to border protection, national security, citizenship changes, because he is divided right down the middle. And the fact is, Mr Speaker, as all Australians know, as you all know, as we move around the country, this Leader of the Opposition has a problem with the public, and the public, Mr Speaker, has a problem with him. Because as you go around and speak to people around the country, they know that there is not something that is quite right about this Leader of the Opposition. They know that in their heads there is a great hesitation around this Leader of the Opposition. He says one thing to one audience and something completely different to the next audience, and the Australian public get it when it comes to this Leader of the Opposition. They have a doubt in their minds about whether or not he is the real deal. So we saw it at the National Conference when he was out telling the left one thing on borders and telling the right something completely different. And it is the case, Mr Speaker, that he is taking exactly the same approach when it comes to citizenship. Members on this side of the parliament supported tough measures when it came to protecting our borders. It's meant that we've stopped the mess that Labor created. It's meant that we have turned around 30 boats since Operation Sovereign Borders commenced, and the Australian public trust this side. They trust the Turnbull government when it comes to border protection and when it comes to making sure that we can get national security right. But the Australian public, Mr Speaker, has this Leader of the Opposition pegged. They know that he is saying one thing in Sydney and something very different in Melbourne, and the Australian public have caught this Leader of the Opposition out, and frankly many of those behind him know exactly what I'm talking about. This duplicitous Leader of the Opposition can't lie straight in bed.
The minister's time has concluded. The member for Kingston.
Gee, I wish I would. I could lose all
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Under this Prime Minister, public schools in my electorate faced a $15 million cut, including Ranella East College, Hallett Cove School and Christie's Beach High School. How is it fair that this Prime Minister is cutting $22 billion from schools at the same time he's giving millionaires a tax cut?
The Minister for Energy and the Environment, representing the Minister for Education.
Mr Speaker, I thank the member for Kingston for her question and acknowledge that in her electorate, under the Turnbull government's plans, 47 schools will be better off under the Turnbull government's plan by an average of $6.3 million each, Mr Speaker.
The Minister will just pause for a second. The Minister can just resume a seat for a second. The member for Kingston will not ignore me when I ask her to cease interjecting. The Minister has the call.
And in the seat of South Australia, the government school sector in the state of South Australia, the government of South Australia,
members on my left,
Mr Speaker, under the Turnbull government's plan, government schools in the state of South Australia will be better off by 5.6%, the Catholic school sector will be better off by 3.7%, and the independent schools sector will be better off by 4.6%.
The member for Chisholm.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister assisting the Prime Minister for Cyber Security. Will the Minister inform the House how the government is assisting Australia's small businesses to protect themselves online?
The Minister representing the Prime Minister for Cyber Security.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for her question. I know that she's a passionate advocate for small businesses in her electorate and does an outstanding job representing them. 3 weeks ago, the Prime Minister and myself met with telecommunications and internet service providers to look at what we need to do to help protect small business from the threat of cyber. And last week, the government announced that it would establish a cyber security task force to drive fast action to improve Australia's capability in response to cyber security and cybercrime incidents. The task force will engage with state and territory governments, also the private sector, to build national capacity to protect small business, particularly from cybercrime. The task force will work to actively protect them from the current threats that we're seeing, such as the WannaCry incident, and see what we can do to help them keep their businesses safe. Because, as we all know, and you would think those on the other side would know, small business is the engine room
of the Australian economy.
The member for Cowan.
The government is also going to be providing $10 million in grants to go to small business to help them to make sure that they are doing everything they can to keep themselves secure, including being able to undertake pen testing. The Turnbull government is bringing a resolve to cyber security and backing it with the financial resources that this country needs to keep us safe from this threat. The $230 million we put behind the cyber security strategy is the first time any government has put money behind a cyber security strategy. We also put $400 million into the Defence White Paper, the first time a substantial investment has gone to our defence forces to ensure that they're prepared for this threat. We have opened the first joint cyber security centre in Brisbane to make sure that state government and industry can work together with the Commonwealth Government to keep ourselves safe. Mr Speaker, we also have announced $1.9 million to establish cyber security centres of excellence to train the next generation of cyber security professionals. Mr Speaker, the Turnbull government has put its money where its mouth is when it comes to meeting our nation's cyber security challenge, especially when it comes to small business.
The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is it fair or needs-based that the Prime Minister is cutting $846 million from public schools in New South Wales over the next 2 years alone, but is giving the elite King's School an extra $19 million over the next 10 years?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, the honourable member will no doubt have noted today in the press the strong support the former New South Wales Education Minister Adrian Piccoli gave to the government school funding reforms. Mr Piccoli, who had signed up to the Labor government's education deal because they offered a particularly good special deal to New South Wales, nonetheless recognised that we have a big opportunity here, a historical opportunity here, as Ken Boston has said, as Catherine Greiner has said, as one educational leader after another has said, to grab this opportunity to deliver national, consistent, needs-based funding. Now, the nonsense about there being less money is just that. $18.6 billion of additional funding over 10 years. Now, the Labor Party can talk about more money. They never funded it. It was fantasy money. It was a political hoax that the Labor Party played. They played it on the state governments and the school systems they entered into agreements with. They talked about David Gonski's needs-based funding, and now they've walked away from it. They talked about their care and concern for students, and now they've abandoned them. Every principle they said they were committed to about school funding, needs-based, consistent, transparent, they've thrown aside. The funding model we've presented is consistent, needs-based, it is transparent across the nation. It is what David Gonski recommended, and it's what we're delivering. Labor should drop the politics and focus on the children. Forget about the education bureaucrats and the education union officials and focus on the children. We're committed to ensuring our children and our grandchildren get the funding they deserve that meets their needs and the quality teaching they need to get ahead and achieve their dreams.
The member for Latrobe.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Justice and Minister assisting the Prime Minister for Counter-Terrorism. Will the Minister update the House on the proposed national firearms amnesty? What action is the government taking to confront the threat of illegal firearms in our community?
The Minister for Justice.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Latrobe for that question and the keen interest that he continues to take in law enforcement matters as a representative here in the parliament. Now, the National Firearms Amnesty will commence on the 1st of July and last for 3 months until the end of September. And this is the first national firearms amnesty that we've had in Australia since the gun laws were changed in 1996 in response to the massacre at Port Arthur. Now, during the amnesty period, people who have unregistered firearms or firearm-related items in their possession, for whatever reason, will have the chance to legally dispose of them without penalty. People who participate in the amnesty will be helping to keep the community safe by ensuring that unregistered firearms, illegal firearms, do not fall into the wrong hands. Sadly, as we've seen here and in other parts of the world, just one gun in the wrong hands can be deadly. Unregistered firearms that end up in the hands of criminals are very difficult to recover, meaning they can pose a greater risk than registered firearms when they are lost or stolen. And we've had examples here in Australia. An illicit firearm was used to murder Curtis Cheng in New South Wales, and an illegal firearm was also used in the Lindt Cafe siege. Now, this government has a very strong record of doing what we can to reduce the threat of illegal firearms in our community. We've introduced legislation that doubles the maximum penalty and provides for mandatory minimum sentences of 5 years imprisonment for those that are engaged in gun smuggling, legislation that inexplicably continues to be held up by the opposition in the Senate. We've also invested $88 million to increase screening and examination for international mail, sea and air cargo. This funding boost gives our agencies the tools that they need to intercept firearms trying to be smuggled across our borders. We've invested $116 million for the National Anti-Gang Squad, with strike teams now in Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, Western Australia and South Australia, and liaison officers in the other states and territories. Since the interception of the National Anti-Gang Squad, they seized over 5,500 illegal firearms and gun parts. We've provided $25 million for the expansion of the AFP's Rapid Lab, the National Forensics Rapid Lab, which enhances the ability of the AFP to detect illegal firearms that may be smuggled during the mail. This amnesty has been a long time in the making, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's critical that we reduce the number of illegal firearms in our community, and now is the time to act for Australians that may be in possession of an illegal or unregistered firearm, to avoid the very severe penalties that are associated with it outside of the amnesty period. Information is available online and by calling a national hotline, and I urge any Australian with one of these guns in their possession to take action.
Concluded. The Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Thank the Prime Minister.